Okay. Welcome everyone to the Budget Town Hall for members of the University Senate and Faculty Councils. I'm Erin Johnson, Chief of Staff to the EVP CFO Mike Gower here in University Finance and Administration. I'd like to welcome you today and begin with a few reminders. On the next slide, we are in a webinar setting, but we will be recording starting now. And we will make this recording available on finance.rutgers.edu, as well as share it out to all attendees after the fact. We will address questions at the end of the meeting. This is a standard process we use in our finance town halls, and we make use of the Q&A feature that you'll find at the bottom of your Zoom screen. You'll be able to submit there either with your name or anonymously. And when we get to Q&A, we will answer your questions. Any questions that we're unable to answer during this session, we commit to answering in writing, and we will post those alongside the slides and the recording at the end of the meeting. So if you do have questions, please do take advantage of the Q&A function rather than raising hands or trying to use any other method. And with that, I'd like to turn us to the next slide and introduce EVP CFO Mike Gower. He's also the University Treasurer here at Rutgers. Hi, Mike. Want to take us through the agenda?
Yeah, please. Thank you, Erin. And good afternoon, everyone. Appreciate you joining us today. We're going to take a look at a number of different things, but this is our second Budget Town Hall for the University Senate and Faculty Councils. We established these sessions as an initiative that arose from the administrative response to Senate Charge S2307, RCM detailed recommendations. Our goal is to spend one session each year focused on the university budget and its components, and the other addressing the budget process, including the RCM tool. Today's session is the latter. We will provide a brief overview of the budget process, including how the administrative or central functions of both central administration and the chancellor-led units, how those are put together, and then how they are implemented through the RCM tool. I'm joined today by the chief business officers of each of the chancellor units and by Terry Graham-Riak, our assistant vice president for budget and financial planning. So Erin will be managing the Q&A, and as she said, we will be publishing the answers to any questions that are not able to be addressed today. Next, please. So the Rutgers budget process is actually many budget processes embedded in one long year-round session now. I'll focus on the high-level overview and the role that university finance plays in the process. Since Rutgers is a state-assisted university that receives appropriations directed in the annual state budget, it's important that we first consider the state process in order to understand the university's process. And just as a reminder, or maybe you don't know this, but the annual state budget directs appropriations specifically to each of the four chancellor-led units. They're not commingled. They are directed specifically in language within the budget bill. Next page, please. So the state budget process is depicted here. As you can see, the developmental process for the state of New Jersey begins in July and runs through the early part of the new year. This process includes a period of deliberation prior to the governor's review and ultimately be approval by the signing of an Appropriations Act into law. As you see here, the state budget starts with reviewing priorities, economic forecasts and assumptions, and most importantly, setting preliminary revenue targets, as that is the fundamental basis for what the legislature can decide to spend ultimately. Agencies prioritize. We submit a budget initiative form each year This details our general appropriations as well as specific line item appropriations that are either continued, we wish to continue, or might be new initiatives that we want to propose. That review takes place in the fall and the early part of the new year, resulting in the governor's budget address, which is in the end of November, end of February. It was recently announced. That is then the beginning of the budget deliberation by the legislature. They do a variety of reviews themselves. There are hearings that take place for the higher education committees. And then, again, most importantly, the state estimates again its revenue projections based on income tax information coming in April and May. And then that puts forward the capacity for what the state can afford to do. At the end of the process, which is literally the last week of June in most cases, there is an agreement about the budget as an overall thing, and then as individual line items. Those go through each of the chambers. Once approved, goes to the governor for signature. Although the governor has a line item veto capacity to be able to take out specific items, but the governor must also certify revenue levels. Once that is in place, that Appropriations Act is law. I should note that in New Jersey, one legislature cannot commit the following legislature. So these are really year by year by year activities. Something may be started in one year and ended the next year by the choice of the legislature with the approval of the governor. Next, please. So likewise, the budget process at Rutgers runs throughout the year. While we are doing budget requests to the state, we ask that the administrative units, the central units, as well as the chancellor unit support units, the support units within the chancellor's offices, prepare budget requests and bring those forward. For university support units, those budgets are reviewed by budget advisory and university budget committees. The budget advisory committees are made up of deans and chancellor office representatives. They constitute each of the major focal areas in central administration, such as IPNO, University Human Resources, Office for Information Technology, my unit, University Finance Administration, University Academic Affairs, Office for Research. I probably missed one, but those are the general ones. They provide, they get input from the unit leader, provide information, provide advice for what is then to be submitted to the University Budget Committee. The University Budget Committee is made up of myself, Prabhas Mogi, the Executive Vice President for Academic Affairs, and the four Chief Business Officers of the Chancellor units. Our job is to advise the chancellors and the president in terms of recommendations for the following year's budget for these central administrative functions. That happens iteratively during the months of October, November, and December, ultimately coming up with recommendations that go to them. It's important that this gets done at that time of the year because we then have to run the allocation process. And I'll talk about that in detail shortly, but the calculations for the Responsibility Center allocations have to take place before the academic and auxiliary units can prepare their budgets. In other words, they need to be informed by what kinds of central administrative and chancellor level administrative costs will be part of their overall budgets. That takes place in January, February-ish. Then units meet with the chancellor's office to review and refine their budgets. Those budgets ultimately are submitted April, beginning of May, to the university budget office. That's the point at which the budget is consolidated, reconciled, worked through in case there are questions or issues or overlap between certain pieces of it. But it worked through at that time to prepare the final budget. And then that goes to the Board of Governors for review. And what we have to do at that point, though, is to wait for the legislature to finish, typically. So we may have this all prepared around the middle of June with assumptions from what we might be getting from the state. Those assumptions could certainly be wrong or could be different in reality, and we have to adjust the budget accordingly. So that takes place literally in the first week of July, and prepare the final package to go to the Board of Governors, typically in the second week of July. Next, please. So this details more about what happens with each unit, preparing budgets, presentations, requests. These requests may be just continuation of existing activities. They may be new requests, new initiatives. They may be other types of changes. Those go through this budget advisory committee process for feedback, and then to the budget committee, as I mentioned. We then have to put it all together and make a recommendation to the president and chancellors. That's the hard part. Next, please. So each year, the University Budget Committee takes a look at what we call principles, guiding principles, things that we would look at in order to make decisions between different items. These are examples like enabling the mission and university priorities, safeguarding assets, long-term viability, intergenerational equity, of course, prudent and responsible financial management and resilience, and others pleased to pop up in here. We know that we have to support mission-critical enterprise-wide costs. There are some things that, and I'll show this in a moment, some things that we don't have a choice about. They consist of examples like, well, I'll show you the specifics in a minute, but just give one example, the cost of software licenses for enterprise-wide initiatives. Yes, we negotiate those with vendors, but they are contracted and we have to take them on. There may be things that come through benefits. And I'll show you examples of those in a minute. Next is a particular initiative. Do we look at it about incentivizing growth aligned to mission and priorities? Next. Is an initiative going to help us in minimizing risk in some respect, safeguarding our assets? In other words, is there potentially a particular fiscal plant type of initiative that needs to happen to protect a circumstance in our buildings, as an example? Next. Is there something that might return on investment? In other words, if we put in $1, we get $2 back. Those are ones that we definitely would like to see more of, but they're absolutely one of the things to assess. Next. And finally, we look at the prior year's fiscal year budget, of course, use that as a foundation upon which we can build, look at the rates and fees associated with that, look at the trends associated with that. Next. So this year was very tough. We had established upfront that the total budget increases for local support units that would be allocated out to responsibility centers could not exceed 3% growth. That we felt was important from the standpoint of controlling the allocated costs to units and trying to stay below the general growth of revenues, which has been recent years roughly 4%. So by staying below that level, we would not be making the situation worse. With that cap and with the hold on strategic funds, not changing those, we could only support non-discretionary mission critical increases. These are the specific ones here. Increases in need-based student financial aid. That is absolutely foundational to us. There are rising costs for utility commodities, in particular transmission fees, things that are going to be required of us by our providers. We had to provide for contractual increases associated with library collections. We have been protecting library collections and against inflation over time and maintain funds to put that, keep that in place. Increases, as I mentioned, related to software and software-related contracts. Examples of this are our Microsoft suite, but it could be anything, including our Canvas learning management system, you name it. All those are put together, and we look at those and see what we have to deal with. There were some specific investments in student and academic related experiences that we could fund. We had to had incremental debt service for university-wide capital projects that, again, were not discretionary. They had to be funded. And then finally, increased payments in benefit costs. One of these is direct payments for retirement matching. The other had to do with the employee tuition benefit. Putting those all together and recognizing that we had really no choice, there were no funds to give to the central units for operations. So we then required those units to absorb their salary and fringe benefit increases, whatever there would be, and to contribute back a 1% reduction in their units' costs. So University Finance Administration, I have to find the funds within my existing budget less 1% of how to manage the salary programs for the employees in my unit. Next. I'd like to pause for a moment and let my colleagues from the chancellor's offices talk about the processes that go on in their areas. I should note that just like we limited central cost increases to no more than 3%, the chancellor's offices likewise limited chancellor central costs that go specifically to one or another COU to no more than 3%. So I would like to now pass it to Kathy Bramwell to talk a little bit about what goes on at this stage of the game in your budget process. Kathy.
Thank you, Mike, and good afternoon to everybody. So at Rutgers Health, our budget process is well underway in that each dean of our schools or director of our centers and institutes have submitted to the Chancellor Unit their annual budget for FY 2026 and their projection for 25. After that, we have an individual meeting with every single unit where we understand all the assumptions they made with respect to revenue and expenses, and they talk about their strategic priorities for the next few fiscal years. So those budget meetings will end in the middle of next week, during which time we will look at all of the budgets and perform a consolidation for final submission to the university by the end of March. So again, these are built from the ground up. There's a lot that goes into it in each unit and each school. But where we are now is, again, well underway, and that each of those units are now presenting their budgets to the chancellor units.
Thank you, Kathy. For perspective from Rutgers, New Brunswick, Nayland Smith, please.
Thank you, Mike. So very much like Kathy just mentioned, deans are engaged at this moment around the budget. I just would like to give you a little perspective of the timing. Deans are generally engaged in the late fall, so preparation begins essentially December through January. And we start to see budget submissions in February. We conduct quite a few meetings in that time frame, and we consolidate those budgets by the end of March. Just to give you a sense of what is in the budget submission. So to aid in the development, deans provide budget template and the narrative. The narrative provides more qualitative information about the circumstances shaping their budget. There's a budget template, essentially a spreadsheet, and more quantitative information, which complements the narrative, is included there. The narrative touches on a number of areas, including, but not limited to, faculty workload. So it discusses teaching workloads, enrollment trends, various faculty ratios where applicable. It speaks to the hiring plan, what are the workforce needs and demands shaping the next fiscal year. Data, what are the data needs, or how is data being used to make key executive decisions. It speaks to retention rates, graduation rates, and things of that nature. Of course, it delves into the fiscal responsibility of the unit and how they are going to manage through the following year with respect to enrollment, capital expenses or maintenance, new programs or partnerships. And we also touch on advancement or fundraising opportunities. The template itself kind of quantifies much of what I just mentioned. So it puts numbers to, the hiring plan. So it discusses, faculty needs, startup packages and things of the like. And again, quantification of any capital needs and considerations for tuition. And we wrap it up with some information around grant activity and production. So as mentioned, we're at the end point. I would say after next week, we will be done with our meetings and we'll proceed with a budget consolidation, which is then submitted to Mike Gower's office. That's essentially the process for New Brunswick.
Thank you, Nayland. And for Rutgers, Camden, Bob McGee.
Hello, everyone. First, I've got to acknowledge that beautiful picture of the Paul Robeson Library in Camden. We are currently working on our budget process, as mentioned by my colleagues, through Chancellor Tillis across campus, working and meeting with the deans to assess their current fiscal year funding through our forecast model to determine where we are, where we see opportunities and challenges. This then is part of that planning for FY26 budget, which again is part of this process and incumbent upon the deans to be able to meet the goal that we ensure the departments and the units are able to determine the distribution of their needs as most appropriate within the RCM budget model. Together, we are and will be developing strategies for both the operating and the special initiative funding in Camden, and determining the best way to meet our mission of student-focused student support through Camden. That's where we are. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. And for Rutgers Newark, Arcelio Ponte.
Hello, everyone. And I'll also acknowledge, Bob, it is a great picture for your campus center. So thank you, everyone. Similar to my colleagues, I mean, we go through an extensive process of engagement with each of our schools and units. And in fact, last week, we finished at least the initial rounds with each of the schools, including discussions with the deans and the lead business officers. We go through a process of a SWOT analysis and making sure that we, within our budget office, understand the dynamics and forces that our schools are operating under and understand the priorities for the schools, and certainly any investments that the school wants to make, and understand how that aligns to their overall strategic plan. We do go through a line item review of each of both the revenues and the expenses, and discuss any significant changes as compared to the previous year. We do engage then with the chancellor, the provost, and some of the other chancellor leads to discuss the overall presentation of the campus budget. And so that's scheduled for next week. And we'll go through each of the school requests and make decisions with the chancellor of the best use of the university resources and to ensure that we meet our targets for FY26. Mike, back over to you.
Thank you, Aracilio. So as noted by my colleagues, you know, the bulk of the work right now is being done between the respective chancellor offices and the respective deans and directors' offices. And that's the foundation of our budget model, that those conversations, those discussions, those prioritization work is specific to each of the chancellor units, but is done there during this time frame. We then pull it all together, as I mentioned, in the late April, May timeframe, reconcile, see where we need to go, see if we have any issues, and then get that ready and stand by for the state legislature to finish its work. That sounds really easy. It's not. It takes weeks. Lots of questions, lots of back and forth with individual units and with the chief business officers here. During this budget preparation time, the University Budget Office acts as a resource, in particular as it relates to the use of the budget preparation tool, or guidelines in terms of, or guidance in terms of any particular questions as it may be come from individual units or schools or the chancellor's offices. So thank you again, my colleagues. I want to take a few moments and talk about the RCM tool. The Responsibility Center Management tool is a piece of the budget process. It's not the budget process itself. It is a tool that we use to account for certain things as we go through the budget process. Next slide, please. In Responsibility Center Management, direct revenues flow to units. So those consist of tuition, F&A return, fees, and other direct income. Those go to individual schools or attributed to them. Those responsibility centers include schools, but also certain research centers, not all of them, but certain ones, and auxiliary units like housing and dining as examples. Those responsibility centers then prepare their budget around what are their direct expenses, and they understand from the RCM allocations themselves that were calculated back in December and January, what their indirect costs would be for shared services. Now, what you do not see here is the state appropriation. The state appropriation is controlled by the chancellors, and the chancellors use that state appropriation to make the whole thing work in terms of what individual schools need to maintain their programs within the limits of the appropriations that we have available to us. That's the hard part. We could use a lot more state appropriation our state appropriations have been relatively flat, if not decreased within the 11 and a half years that I've been here. And there's a great deal of concern because the governor's proposed reductions in those for next year. Now, fortunately, the governor's proposal is just a starting point, and the legislature has the final word with that. But it is concerning because those dollars are the ones that make things work here. Without state appropriations, there are only a handful of schools within the entire university that can break even on their own revenues. And those are very specific circumstances. That's what you would expect at a state university, that most of the schools or units need a piece of the state appropriation to get themselves in the right position relative to the overall chancellor unit. Next slide, please. So our support units at both the university and the chancellor unit levels are in these categories: general administration, academic support, et cetera, et cetera. So these are the 9 pools, if you will, where we gather costs. The university level functions are spread across all responsibility centers. But for instance, the chancellor unit level functions in New Brunswick are just allocated to New Brunswick-based programs. But using the same calculations, using the same methodology. Next, please. These are units that are considered the central support units. Most of them are fairly straightforward. Some of them live under other ones. One that I'll point out to you is the category of enterprise-wide costs. These are costs such as the software licenses I talked about before, such as the benefit costs, benefit budgets I mentioned before, that are overseen by a central support unit, but are not part of their operations themselves. University debt service, for example, is managed by University Finance Administration, but it's not part of our operating budget. We consider that an enterprise-wide budget that my unit oversees. That's an important distinction in that we then separate costs that are mandatory or non-discretionary or things that go on time over time from the operations of units themselves. Next, please. And these are examples of local support units. There are similar ones between chancellor units, but they are set up to fit the particular needs of the chancellor unit. So they may have some real differences between them. Next. And I mentioned the allocation methodologies. They derive from metrics that are gathered. These are the ones that are used for particular ones. And I should note that we use statistics from fiscal year 24 to advise the budget for fiscal year 26. So we use actual student headcount. We use actual personnel and non-personnel expenditures. We use actual modified total grant expenditures from fiscal 24 as a way to determine the proportions that go to individual responsibility center units for fiscal 26. Now, for the first time this year, we are using 2 years of data, or the average of 2 years of data. So we're using actually data from fiscal 23 and 24, averaging that and using that to advise 26. That's an attempt to try to smooth out fluctuations and changes year over year. I think it will be helpful as we go along, that will keep from them being large changes year over year in allocations. Next. Use an example here of how this works. So for instance, academic support unit, These are things like enrollment services, the financial aid office, continuing studies. Some of these costs are offset by, like enrollment services, are offset directly by application fees, for instance, so that there is a netting down of the cost that then is allocated. That netted cost is allocated in this case based on proportional share of student headcount, and again, depends on what that unit is addressing. If it's directed just at undergraduate students, it'll use an undergraduate headcount. If it's supporting graduate students, it uses graduate headcount. If it's supporting all students, it uses a total. So in this example here, school A, student body represents 10% of the undergraduate population and 5.5% of the graduate population. For the allocation of costs for an undergraduate academic support function, since it's undergraduate, it would then get 10% of the total of that function. Next, we have another example. Debt service. This comes under general and administrative, and that includes expenses from university administrative units, including my units, human resources, and so on. We use investment income that comes from cash management, again, first to offset these costs before they're allocated out, and then to allocate the net out. And we use, in this case, proportional share of prior year's total expenses. We exclude certain things that are pass-through or bulky elements and really focus in on total expenses for operations of those functions. So an example here, school A's operating expense is 7% after those exclusions, so its share of G&A costs would be 7%. It's a fairly, for those, any of you who are cost accountants out there, it's fairly straightforward. It's not really magic. Next. And with that, I want to thank my colleagues. I know this was a very quick overview, but I did want to bring you all up to date with where we were in the budget process, how we arrived at conclusions for central administrative costs, what were the things we were able to fund, what we could not fund, and that was any new initiative within the central administrative functions. They have to, if they have to happen, they have to self-fund them within existing funds. A little bit about the budget process at the chancellor level that's going on right now. And then finally, an overview of how the RCM tool works. So now I come to the most important part of this time, and that is Q&A. And Aaron will be managing the Q&A for us, and that can be directed to me or to any of my colleagues here.
So Mike, the first question we have in the Q&A is actually one that was pre-submitted, so I pasted it on the next slide.
Oh, good. Thank you.
And the question, and I'm also, for those of you who are looking at the Q&A field, you'll see that I'm making this available on the Q&A as one we're answering live. So hopefully you will be able to then see the text more closely than on this screen, if that's more accessible for you. But the question is, the priorities of the Rutgers Central Administration concerning capital investments and facilities opportunities at other campuses, such as Camden and Newark, have not been clearly communicated. Each campus appears to identify potential projects and present funding requests, which are approved or denied by Central Administration. I highlighted the key part of the question. Could you clarify the financial strategy guidelines that are used to make these decisions to campuses such as Camden and Newark, which are also productive in research and need further investment to continue enhancing both our undergraduate and graduate education? I'll just say very quickly an additional detail that is not on this slide, but is in the Q&A, is that this is a question that comes from Senator David Salas.
David.
David, excuse me.
Thank you. We're going to post a written response to this too. So go ahead and put that up, but I'll read from that or paraphrase from that. So capital investments, we have more need for capital investments than we possibly have capacity to do, funding to do. So it's a complicated process, but it's one that involves each of the chancellor-led units. It starts specifically at school levels or schools and center levels, identifying new capital projects or major renovation needs. I'm not talking about smaller ones. I'm talking about major ones such as buildings or wholesale renovations. Those are put together and then prioritized by each of the chancellors. They can get advice or assistance from the Chief Operating Officer, Tony Calcato, and his team, from my team as needed. And help with that prioritization. In the case of deferred maintenance projects on a given campus, IPNO works with the local leadership, whether it be in the dean's representative or from the respective chancellor's offices, to identify particular priorities in that category. It involves, as what I'm trying to say is, it involves input from deans, chancellors, Tony and myself. Then it's a matter of what is available funding. And that available funding may be coming from a state grant program. It may be coming from, and this doesn't happen enough, from gifts. We had about 10 years ago a major bond initiative by the state that provided funds for certain projects for which we provided matching. We don't have enough capital. We don't have enough debt capacity to fund everything that we need. So within the conversations between the chancellors and the president, there are set, unless there are opportunities available to us, and I'll give an example of that in a minute. Have to balance off the needs, the priority, the real, there might be a operating concern, a danger in some form. We had that issue a couple of years ago as it related to our cogeneration plants needing renovation so that they would not stop. And that had to be prioritized. So it is a variety of different elements that are used to prioritize what funds we have. Now, sometimes opportunities arise. A couple of years ago, the state prioritized use of some federal funding, and that funding went towards 3 projects. The construction of the new medical school for Robert Wood Johnson Medical School, the new facility for that, including translational medicine and so on, as part of the Helix project in downtown New Brunswick. It also provided funding for the fit out and completion of laboratory space in Life Sciences 2 in Newark. And it provided funding for Cooper Street project in Camden. That is the redoing of an entire frontage of Cooper Street with a new facility built behind it. Those projects, again, were jump-started by state funding that was available to us, or federal funding through the state that was available to us. In the case of the medical school, certain tax credits that we could use to offset that. And then the balance was done by what some of our debt capacity that we have available to us. Some of you have heard me talk about financial sustainability, the need to be able to generate funds for capital reinvestment, in particular as it relates to deferred maintenance. Deferred maintenance is not just facilities, I also call it technology. We've not been in a position to put money away to do those things or to leverage debt by having money to be able to support that debt for several years now. And so therefore we've had limits in terms of major capital projects, notwithstanding the opportunity for those three. So that's one of the concerns I have in the longer term. How do we fund those things? How do we generate enough capacity to be able to make a dent against deferred maintenance, so on? We do not see prospects for getting additional funding from the state anytime soon. If we do, it'll be kind of on the margins or directed towards something particular. So that's developing capital funds is one of my biggest concerns. And I should note that I recently tasked a working group that consists of people from my unit and from Tony Calcado's unit to review the current process and develop recommendations to enhance the governing planning, approval, and financial strategy around capital projects as we go forward, especially as we have a new president forthcoming to be able to say, suggest processes that can be modernized or can be more inclusive.
Thank you, Mike. Perhaps we could, for the other questions that have come in, maybe take the slides down.
Thank you.
And I'll just read them as they come. This next one is perhaps something that Mike could start, and if the CBOs need to add on, that would be welcome. The question is, are you able to tell us how the current federal government cuts are impacting the discussions for the upcoming budget year?
Yeah, so thank you for that. And this is one of those where I can call it an absolute moving target. Since the ground keeps changing on us, we don't know what a final impact might look like. So in that respect, we are preparing the budget on a normal basis, if you will, but then taking into account where are there contingencies that we might have to reduce. So if we had a reduction in F&A reimbursement from the federal government, where might that happen? Well, we can look at where F&A is earned by school, whether it be from NIH or NSF or DOD, any of the agencies. We can look at where it has been earned, where it's being earned, and make some educated guesses so that we can say, okay, think for a contingency in this particular area if we were to lose 5% of that funding or 10% of that funding. Likewise, when it comes to the state budget, same thing. We see the budget proposal from the governor as the starting point of the budget plan. I mentioned that whole process that would go on, including re-estimating available revenues at the state level. The state itself is concerning itself about federal government cuts because a lot of each state's budget comes from the federal government. Example for that is Medicaid. If that were to be cut funding from the federal level, it would have an impact on the state's budget, and that could have an impact on us. So it is what I've been saying and asked about this is it is very important at this stage to be prepared and be nimble and to be very, very prudent in terms of any new initiatives, whether it be a new hire, a new purchase, any new initiatives, because we don't know where things are going to land. We feel pretty comfortable that the threat to us by F&A is probably, in one respect, behind us, thanks to court action and thanks to probably the language that's going to be in some form of continuing resolution for the rest of this federal fiscal year. However, the next budget, starting in October, anything could happen. There could be new requirements. There could be a change in how F&A works that's written into that budget law. There could be changes in a lot of different ways. So we have to think about contingencies. What do we do in case we have to bridge ourselves to less revenue coming in? That's where it's important to both have a plan what to do if we have that to happen, and how long we need to bridge, and what can we use in terms of our reserves or resources to be able to do that bridging. I can say, though, that if we were to be hit by several of these at one time, say the entire proposal on F&A that was made and the entire proposal from the governor's budget, if that all were to happen at one time, that would be incredibly significant and a big require us to make a big pivot relative to operations. We'd bridge towards that. It's very clear that you can't just turn off things, but we'd have to take a hard look at stuff in that regard. But again, the problem is that we don't know. It keeps moving, keeps changing. The chaos that has been caused is, I suspect intentional, but it is causing chaos, and it wasn't helped by the governor's proposal.
Okay,
Aaron?
next question. Mike, previously Rutgers has described itself as a public research university, but in your opening, you talked about it as a state-assisted university, which is true to some extent of all universities, regardless of control, public or private. Does this change in language reflect a change in the way that the Rutgers administration perceives the university's
No.
identity as public role?
No, not at all. Not at all. Our mission is public, regardless of how how much funding comes from the state. Our mission is in terms of education, research, public service, and healthcare is core to the university's identity, and it's absolutely essential no matter where the money comes from. Just refer to the fact that the state's assistance in our meeting that mission has grown less and less, either through direct budget changes or the effect of inflation over time. But absolutely no, would not impact our mission or perspective of responsibility to the public.
Thanks, Mike. This one is from Ron Quincy. How are we planning for potential budget impact of federal policies related to DEI?
We're doing that one at a time as it becomes an issue. It may come to us from an agency that is concerned about language. It may come to us as the ending of a program. That's been very, very few of those thus far. Very, very few. But each individual case is assessed as it may come from an agency. We're not changing our perspective or our direction or our responsibilities. If there is a concern over a particular piece of language, there is a discussion that takes place either from our Office for Research, with the assistance of our General Counsel's office in some way or shape and form, so that we can try to continue our work in that space.
Thank you. Next question. With deferred maintenance in estate master planning, can you more actively decamp people to available commercial office space or offsite to allow for buildings to be demolished or refurbished as part of greening our buildings for health and efficiency?
That is a well, I'd like to have that problem. I'd like to have enough resources to be able to do some large scale deferred maintenance. In fact, I'm looking at ways that perhaps we can use what debt capacity we have to do that such a thing. I think your point is well taken about in some cases we need to consolidate space, use other space and we need to demolish some space. We've actually identified some buildings that we need to just take down. They're empty or generally empty, and they need to just come take down. But that would be part of an overall deferred maintenance plan. Again, one that is constantly underway with IP&O, but that we're now intersecting that plan with finance and debt planning to see if we could make a big play. If we could get ourselves so that we could generate funds, if we could have a bottom line to generate funds to reinvest back in deferred maintenance, we do that. But I'm hoping to have that problem. And I think your suggestion about the moving around, it is important for us to look at utilization and look at opportunities to reduce the footprint and then improve the footprint that we have.
Thank you, Mike. I have one more question in the queue. So if you are out there and thinking about what to ask, please feel free to go to the Q&A feature at the bottom and type in your question. This one we have now, Mike, is the following. This presentation effectively explains the budget planning, preparation, and approval process. However, I'm particularly interested in identifying and eliminating redundant administrative costs, if any. If this topic was covered, I may have missed it, but could you please provide additional information on this aspect?
No, I'd be happy to do that. And it relates to projects that we're getting underway very shortly. In particular, we're expecting two, I hasten to call them, I'm hesitate to call them pilots because they're big, but if they should work, we will extend them. And that is to look at administrative functions, first of all, as they relate between the two medical schools as they become one school of medicine. Where's their overlap? And when I'm talking about those kinds of costs, I include how those functions flow into both the chancellor's office, into central administration. So it's the ecosystem. It's not just saying, okay, what's going on in the School of Medicine, and that's an island, and the other stuff doesn't matter. The other is a similar kind of effort to be envisioned in New Brunswick. And both of these are going to kick off soon with some external assistance to really document where there might be overlap, where there might be opportunity for more efficiency. But as important as the efficiency is effectiveness. We can't be talking about cost efficiency without talking about effectiveness of operations. So those two have to be married as we look at these functions. They have to work better as well as be more efficient and less redundant, as you suggest there. I can't possibly say that there are not redundancies. There, I'm sure, are redundancies that exist in places. What we have to do is really document those processes, find them, rework them, and deploy them. It is absolutely essential that we take a hard look at these things, given the decentralized nature of the university in general, and our needs now for financial sustainability as it relates to costs and operational excellence.
Thanks, Mike. And from a questioner, thank you. To give Mike a well-deserved break, do your other colleagues
Oh,
want
thank
to
you, whoever asked this.
could the other colleagues expand upon one or more points made or add anything further from the Chancellor unit's perspective? So I'd invite whichever one of the 4 CLU leads would like to kick that off, sharing any feedback you have or additional nuance you'd like to share.
And if no one volunteers, I'll pick somebody.
So I'll take the bite and I will
Thank you,
volunteer. We are very, at Rutgers Health, we are very aligned with all of the answers that Mike gave to all of you, including, the capital decisions are very difficult because our capital needs far exceed, our resources. And so that's really very difficult. And we have to align all that decision-making, with our priorities. As well as the modeling for potential reductions in whether it's state or federal funding. We, in meeting with our deans and all of these deans meetings and our directors of centers and institutes, we are asking people not to do kind of the standard, what does a 5%, 10%, 15% kind of reduction look like, but to really take a thoughtful look at your own particular area and identify what would happen if different areas, of funding was reduced, whether it's, other potential areas of revenue, which we're all looking at, or whether it's some, expense remediation, which is always really very difficult. Because the majority of our expenses, as you know, are personnel, and so that's always really very complicated. So we are very much aligned. I will also say I agree that we have administrative inefficiencies and duplication, I'm sure. And that's why I personally am very excited and thrilled to be a part of this project where we are looking at the administrative efficiencies, of the 2 medical schools to see how we can extend that, kind of to other areas of the university. But again, it's not just about expense reduction, as Mike said, and I really want to emphasize, it's how can we grow and be more efficient and be more effective in the delivery of our support structure. Our faculty need a strong administrative support structure that's kind of efficient and nimble and can really help them, and that's what we're really trying to achieve.
Mike, if I may as well.
Please, Bob.
I would challenge and ask each of the participants on the call to take a moment, if you haven't, and really delve into the financial sustainability plan. We still have old perceptions. Again, I'm from Camden, that Camden is continually compared to Newark and New Brunswick, and Camden gets the leftovers. And just being transparent, I call that out. However, with the new financial sustainability plan that's been approved by the board, we're seeing now greater transparency and holistic review across the entire university. Deans and directors are getting together from all the campuses. The business leads are getting together from all the campuses. And the one thing that everyone quickly imagines is, oh gosh, you're dealing with those same issues that we are. So again, while it's not publicized widely, if you will, there are things that are being done to address, I suspect, many of your concerns that may be historical or or maybe something you've experienced in the past. But moving forward, please take a moment to look at that information. As I deal with my colleagues, faculty, and staff in Camden, we center around that, and it really presents an opportunity for discussion and a validation that if we follow this plan, we're all going to be better off at each of the CLUs, but also as a Rutgers University whole.
That's great. Nicely said, Bob. But Mike, if I can chime in as well.
Please.
Don't mind. Key to all this for us, particularly at Rutgers Newark, is our continuous communication across the various campus and schools and units. We do have a working group, particularly focused on the financial sustainability initiative, as Bob mentioned. So it's important for us to stay in constant communication. I will completely agree with my colleagues that we have been not only working across our campus units, but also across the central administration, working very closely with IP&O and OIT, for example, on the capital needs, understanding the headwinds that Mike described earlier, both on the federal side and the state side, and knowing that our partners are working in close collaboration with us to meet the demands of our students, to help us achieve our target enrollments, for example, and what that might mean in terms of additional services. And so for us, the continuous communication has been key in helping to plan for what's needed for FY26.
I'll round us out here. So in New Brunswick, and I'll pick up on the efficiencies topic. In New Brunswick, finding optimal ways to operate, developing efficiencies is a key tenet in our budget planning. At this point, given the headwinds that have been mentioned, we're taking a position of assessment and preparation, right? Understanding where we are at this point, what assets and other resources we have at our disposal, and thinking about doing some thought work about how we might prepare for the future. Again, it's an evolving landscape, as Mike mentioned. So that is where we are at this point. And I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you all. Aaron, do we have any more questions?
We do not have any more questions at this time.
Well, if there are no more questions, we'll let everybody go. Thank you for your time. Again, we will be posting the recording of this as well as the responses to questions, and make that available and we'll send out a note where to find that. Want to refer you to the next Finance Town Hall. We have these 3 times a year. They are not too dissimilar from this, although we have guest speakers that come to talk about particular areas of operation administration. You can see these at our website, finance.rutgers.edu, from past town halls with the recordings. Our next scheduled date is April 10th at 9 a.m. Aaron, remind me what our general agenda there is.
We are working on a partnership with the Office for Research so that we can address current issues related to research and research financial services.
Excellent.
So it's in the works. We already had someone coming to talk, but now we're thinking about expanding it to try to really address that topical issue.
Well, that should be attractive to many of you. Please join us for that. And we will continue this. So when we return in the fall, we will have an overview of the budget that gets passed this summer. I dare say by that time we'll have a better view of what the federal and the state impact is. If we need something in between because of things going on in that space, we'll schedule something. But we look forward to continuing engagement like this on a regular basis and then as needed. So And with that, I want to thank Aaron, Terry, Kathy, Neil, and Bob Arcelio, and then Kat and Trish for keeping us going here today. And wish you all a good afternoon.
Thanks
Bye
for
now.
coming.